To be or not to be is the opening line in Shakespeare's Hamlet. We're not talking Hamlet today, though I will steal from that and say to tell or not to tell as it relates to dating after federal prison. I'm going to share my experience and some of the experiences of my clients. So let's get started. Hi, it's Justin Paperny with White Collar Advice, and today we're going to talk about dating after prison. Now, I've been told by a number of really great clients that my experience was easier because I went to federal prison and I didn't have children. And there's a lot of truth to that. I was 33 when I went to prison. I was single. So there's some truth to that. Incarceration is harder on your family and your loved ones. And even though you're the one serving time, it is harder on those that love and support you, namely your wife and your children, your husband. So I get that. But on the flip side, while many of us go to prison divorced or single or not married, we come home and we want to rebuild our life. We want to get this experience behind us. And I believe a huge part of that next phase of succeeding post-prison, including in relationships, will really go back to how well you did before you went to prison, and certainly what you did in prison, because when it comes up, you want to be able to speak about it proudly and articulate how hard you worked while away and how the experience didn't beat you down. And rather than run two cliches like it's okay, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, it would be a value, I think, to be able to articulate in a very coherent, realistic way what the experience did to you, what you've learned from it, and how you're becoming better. And I worked hard in prison to prepare for that when I came home, knowing that at 33 I'd want to date and rebuild my life. Many months, like a year or so ago, I did an interview with Esquire magazine. I frankly totally forgot that I had done it. And someone was released from prison and they called me and they were like, "Hey, bud, I read about your quotes in Esquire magazine." I said, "Tell me about it." He said, "You were talking about dating." I said, "Yeah, okay, I recall." Then he actually sent me the magazine. Now, I was in this Esquire magazine with Rock on the cover talking about dating after prison. So we were talking. He's like, I have a successful business. I have money. I'm divorced. I was never really that happy about going to prison. Not like anyone's happy to go to prison. He didn't think he was guilty and he took a plea simply because he thought he'd get his ass handed to him at trial. So he took a plea, went to prison, but he's never really owned what he did. Though, and the more I speak with him, the more he's like, "Yeah, I did it." But he's like, "I need your help dating and telling my story to women because I'm scared to death and I want to get out there again." And I'm like, "But I'm not a dating consultant." They're like, "What? I'm a prison consultant. I can help you with your business, with restitution, with probation, of telling your story." He's like, "Boom, telling my story because I got to get out there. Things are good. I need your help." So he's like, he began to ask me some questions about maybe I shouldn't tell them at all. Maybe I should wait till the third, fourth, fifth date. And by the time they get to know me, then I can tell them and they've seen a good side of me. And he said, "Did you ever do that?" And when you talk about dating after prison, you have to decide very early. Do you want to be transparent and discuss it? Do you have ulterior motives where perhaps you don't really care if they know about it at all and you have a different angle? That wasn't the case with me. I was looking to date, to build a relationship, to start my life, to be transparent and to be honest. If the goal is to mislead or pretend it never happened, because you have a different objective in mind, then I'm not for you. This video shouldn't be for you. This video about dating after prison is about being transparent and learning to tell your story in a way where people will respond appropriately. So he asked me, "Did you ever not tell anyone?" And yes, that happened only one time. So when I was released in August of 2009, I built my career as a prison consultant and speaker. And I was consumed with work, but I would begin to get out a little bit. And out one evening with some friends, I met a very nice girl. I said, "Would you like to have dinner?" She said yes. So I called her. I did not tell her that I had been to prison. We met for dinner in Santa Monica. And like for the first 20 or 30 minutes, I couldn't pay attention to anything that she was saying because in the back of my mind, all I thought was, "My God, when am I going to tell this woman that I went to prison? Like, shouldn't she know? I look semi-normal, I suppose. I speak well, and she thinks I'm probably very successful. She heard I went to USC, and I mentioned I wrote a book, but I didn't say that it was called Lessons from Prison." So like all these things are going through my mind, and pretty quickly in, I felt like a fraud, like a charlatan, that this woman didn't know, and I was uncomfortable, and I knew that she would be uncomfortable, and I totally regretted that she didn't know. So about 30 minutes in, abruptly, without any smoothness, couldn't argue that I was smooth, I said, "Look, here's the deal. This is really uncomfortable for me. It might be more uncomfortable for you, and maybe it's not as big a deal as I think that it is in my mind. But I got to tell you, I just got out of federal prison about 6 weeks ago. I know it's weird. Don't flip out. I'm sorry. I didn't kill anyone. It was a white-collar crime. I got out of prison about 6 weeks ago. I'm on federal probation. I'm hardly listening to you. And frankly, there's a part of me right now that fears that my probation officer is going to freak out when he finds out that I'm paying $18 for a glass of wine. I got to go to the ATM and get some cash because he can't see this bill. I was a little, I was a little shook. I was a little off my game because I felt like a fraud that she didn't know, and she was blown away. She didn't know what to say, and we just sort of sat there. And she said, "Have you practiced that?" I said, "No, I haven't. I haven't practiced it at all. I just felt that you should know. And it would be easy for me to say that it wasn't a violent crime because that's the rationalization. But the truth is, people were hurt because of my actions. I created victims. My family was hurt. And financially, I was destroyed. And my reputation was ruined. And my career was shattered. And I'm rebuilding. So I do not want to give you the impression that things are different than they might be because I'm wearing a Rolex that I bought when I graduated USC that I could not afford today. And I just think it's important that you know." And then I said, "Are you upset? Do you wish you had known before you saw me?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "I still would have gone out with you, but I wish that I would have known." And then I knew that I would always be transparent with someone before I ever saw them again. I knew that I always would. So this gentleman who called me after he was released from prison, he's beginning to tell his story and wanting to date. He said, "I'm meeting someone. Should I tell them?" And I said, "This is your life. It's your choice. I regretted not disclosing to people that I had been to prison. I think you have an obligation to let them know. If it's email, if it's a phone call." And of course the response was, "Well, they're not going to get a chance to really see me if they judge me by that." And I said, "Yes, I recognize that. But we have to put ourselves aside and focus on the person who will be hearing it. It's uncomfortable for them. They might not know anyone that's been to prison. I think you have an obligation to tell them." So once and one time only did I not disclose to someone that I had been to prison. And the rest of that day went fine. Nothing came from it. She respected me for telling her. But of course, the rest of the evening was consumed with questions about prison. So that's what you can expect when you start dating after federal prison. It's not about her, her career, where she's from, her interests, her hobbies. It's about you. What was prison like? In the back of her mind, she'll be thinking, how do I tell my parents this? How do I tell my friends this? I'm dating a guy out of jail. Should I Google him right now? One girl told me one time, I just went to the bathroom to Google you and she came back. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I might have done the same thing if I was in your shoes. So you have to think about them and understand they're going to have a lot of questions as they take in, wow, I'm actually dating a man that went to prison, in part because they think of Cool Hand Luke and Shawshank Redemption. I had women on dates flat out ask me, were you raped? I was not. I've had women ask me, well, do you have a job? I know you've been to prison. Do you have any money? Can you afford to pay for dinner right now? And these are, I didn't blame them. These are questions that they had, questions that frequently come to mind when people hear that someone's been to prison. You know, it's often the perception of things that people worry about, not actually the things themselves or the reality. The perception is because I've been to prison that I'm struggling and I'm broke and I can't get a job. And that's often the perception that women had of me when I met them. Until they knew, they presumed that I was, a successful executive, which I now think I am. So I always told. Now, what about telling through email? I've been asked. I usually would tell someone over the phone because I think it's a little kind of cowardice to, get that way through an email. But I did at times do it through an email. In fact, I tested it a little bit. I would test what's better through the phone, through email. And with respect to an email, I embraced the mantra, I am so transparent. And this is what I told this gentleman who hired me, really to help him begin dating. It's not dating, to tell his story. Much like your PSR interview, without getting into too much prison, just like your PSR interview and working with the government, you should be so open, so transparent, share so much data. The more you share, the more it will help you. I embraced that motto with dating after prison. The more I shared with them, the more they respected me, the more they couldn't hear it from other channels, the more they couldn't hear it from my Department of Justice press release, or some woman at Business Advisor that wrote an article, or a review I got for a lecture I gave in New York or Arkansas or Oklahoma or Chicago, some greedy stockbroker leveraging off his crime to speak and make money. There's so much out there, and I wanted her to hear all of it from me. So if I was introduced to someone or if I met someone, I was on some dating sites. I was on JDate, which I'll get into. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I was on the Jewish dating website. And if I began to connect with someone, before I would actually meet them, I would send them a note that would say something like, out of respect for you, I want to let you know that I was just released from federal prison. I served 18 months after pleading guilty to a white-collar crime. I was a stockbroker at Bear Stearns and UBS. I turned the other way and facilitated a fraud on behalf of my client. I'm embarrassed for what I did. I've suffered immensely for what I did. People suffered as a result of what I did. And I'm working hard every day to make amends. And it's my goal that whomever woman I end up with or whomever I end up dating will see me for more, will judge me not based on what I did, but my response to actions that I created. And I respect you enough to tell you the truth. And no one ever responded negatively to that email. They all said, thank you so much for telling me. I'd still love to see you. Wow, this is going to be the craziest first date I've ever had. I'm looking forward to it. I really appreciate you telling me. Of course, that first date was still consumed with prison and questions. You just have to embrace that. You have to understand that. Okay. Now, a third way, of course, is to tell them on the phone. And I pretty much said it the same way as I did in the email. We'd have some discussions, and it usually would come up with, what do you do? And my career is a little unique because, well, I'm a prison consultant. Sometimes I'd say I'm a lecturer on white-collar crime, and that would lead into, well, what does that mean? And I'd say, well, my clients include the FBI and NYU and USC, my alma mater. And she'd say, well, what do you speak about? How did you get into that field? And I'm say, do you have a couple of minutes? And she'd say, sure. And sometimes I'd be too funny with it, and I'd say, did you ever see the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio? And they're like, yeah, I saw that movie. I said, well, did you like it? Could you date a guy out of jail? And sometimes I was too serious about it, almost too dismissive about it. The further I began to get away from prison, the less serious it was in my life. Because at the time it was all consuming, but the further you get away, you're like, you know what, it was a blip in my life. I worked hard, I'm okay. So sometimes I was too serious. Did you like Catch Me If You Can? Sometimes I was straight to the point. Look, you got to know I just got out of federal prison, as I mentioned in the email. And you'd be surprised how many people actually knew someone that had been to prison. Sometimes it's their fathers or their cousins or their friends, and they wanted to know, what did you do? Was it violent? What happened? And it led to a nice free-flowing discussion. So when we met, so much of the work had been done. And work, what I mean by work is it wasn't all about me. It wasn't all about, why did you go to prison? It was, let's talk about you and your interests. Is there a connection? Could we maybe get together again because we have interests that, we're interested in each other? Have we gotten past the prison issue? And I found email was weak, but I did it. Telling someone over the phone was the easiest and best way and the most respectful way. So we talk about dating after prison. If you've been to prison, you're somewhat desensitized having gone. In fact, even visitation in prison, we don't really understand how traumatized visitors can be coming and going from federal prison, because we're there and we get used to it and we form our routine. We just go down to visitation. They come and they leave. We go back to our dorm and walk the track and say, well, how was your visit? It was cool. It's traumatizing for them. It can be traumatizing for someone to hear that you've been to prison. Now, I have been asked, did anyone ever leave? So there was one time I was out with some friends, and I think it was in Brentwood, and we were just with a group of people, and I began to strike up a conversation with someone, and we were having a glass of wine, and I could tell if I had pursued it, perhaps we could have gone out again, or we could have spent more time together, or done something. And she said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a prison consultant. And by then I began to speak more directly and more confidently about what I did. I said, I'm a prison consultant. I help good people who made bad decisions in an out-of-character moment prepare for prison. She said, well, why do you do that? I said, I was one of those people. He said, what do you mean? I said, yeah, I served time in federal prison. Now I was beginning to have some success after my release. Felt like the efforts were beginning to pay off, and I was no longer going to run from what I did with shame and embarrassment. We all make some bad decisions in life, I reasoned, and I was going to be very direct about it. And this is the first and only time that a woman got up and said, you seem cool and you're good looking, but I can never tell my dad I'm dating a guy out of jail, and I don't want to see you again. I said, well, I didn't ask to see you again. She's like, I know, I can't, this is just weird for me. And I said, I get it. It's cool. I understand. It's fine. I get it. Let's move on. She left, and I went back to my routine, or went back to with my friends. And that was the only time ever that someone has actually got up and said, I cannot associate with a man that's been to prison, and that's just part and parcel to this process. It's okay. And frankly, she was probably thinking, how do you tell your dad that I'm going out with a guy that got out of jail? It's probably not easy. Some common emotions that you can go through as you're telling your story, and this is what I worked on with my client, who was a little too dismissive. Like, it wasn't that big a deal. Like, prison camp wasn't as hard as he thought, that he got in shape and he connected with his kids and he grew his business. you can be too dismissive about it. Like, hey, it's not that big a deal. I did that at times. You can also be too serious, where it's like so you create this serious environment where like you're so like seeking penance and I'm so sorry and I deserve to be held accountable. And it's like, so you have to find that moderation. You have to strike that moderation when you're with someone and you've opened up about what you did, why you went to prison, how you're working hard to make amends. You're beginning to deal with some of the perceptions they have in their mind. Does this guy have a job? Can he pay for dinner? Was it a violent crime? Through the way you tell your story, you have to begin to debunk many of the misperceptions that are in their mind. And frankly, I did that well because I spent so much time working on it, working on my story. I put myself in their shoes, coming up with rebuttals of how I would respond to what they say. And they appreciated that. They appreciated that in my emails, I sent them my Department of Justice press release. I mean, who does that? But I wanted them to know before they heard about it from anybody else. And I said, this is true. I did it. I've paid my price. Let's have some coffee and see if we can move past it. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Cool. Some common responses that I got. A lot of times I didn't care at all. They were like, that's cool. Let's just move on. And by the way, I'm making it seem like I dated that much. I did not. But I dated enough to learn that some did not care. In fact, my client, who is now beginning to tell his story confidently, before he meets them, they know that he's been to prison through email, or when they meet, they say, look, man, I don't care. I've made bad choices. It's cool. I really appreciate you telling me. I respect you. Thank you. So many of them don't care and don't even want to talk about it. That's rare. A lot of them do care, but they have a million questions. Some, as I mentioned, can't get over it at all. And some, this is where you have to be very careful. This happened to me a couple of times. They love it. They love it. They're like, wow, that is hot. That is, wow, you've been to prison. That is like really sexy. And I'm like, I'm not the sexy guy. That's not what I do. They're like, no, it's really, wow. You're like, this is like, wow, I've never met. This is really hot. This one girl said it again and again. So let me be careful. If they love it, I don't think that's a great thing. You got to find someone, I think, that's cool with it, but that does not love the fact that you've been to prison. Again, let's find the moderation here, people. That's what I really want to discuss here, okay? Moderation. You might love it that someone loves that you've been to prison. That's not what I was after. Now, for those of you who are rebuilding your life after federal prison, career-wise, I've learned it's never the right time to get married. And let me see, that didn't come out the right way. Is a convicted felon. You're worried about succeeding, right? You've lost your licenses, your ability to earn money much of the time. My clients are doctors, lawyers, businessmen, accountants. We hold on to these licenses like our arm, right? It's like a piece of us. So even when I came home and I was beginning to succeed as a speaker and as a prison consultant, and I launched a foundation in honor of my mentor, Michael Santos, things were beginning to grow. I still feared, can I make it? Can I succeed and really create a sustainable path to support a family? And part of it was the perceptions in my mind of how I was raised. And I don't know how you were raised, of course, but we want to advance beyond where we were as children, I think. And I was raised with privilege and opportunity and travel and wonderful parents and prep schools and USC and, parents that coddled and took care of me. And when I began to date more seriously, I kind of broke off some relationships because I said, I'm not ready to provide for the way that I was provided for. And I purposely, pulled away because I didn't have the confidence at the time that I could do it, that I was ready. And I liked that I was only supporting myself. When I came home, despite working very hard, there were days as I went through my reentry that I would still I'd wake up at 5 a.m., but I'd wake up, I'd get some work in, then I'd go down to the Pacific Palisades and I'd shut off my iPhone, I'd run 10 miles like I was in prison. And I liked that I wasn't accountable to anyone, a wife, a child, to a business partner. I was accountable to myself. And for that reason, some potential relationships fell by the wayside because I wasn't committed or yet ready to endure all of the responsibilities that come with family. In fact, many of the people that reach out to me who are home from prison say, man, my wife's been a stay-at-home mom, or she's working, but I was the breadwinner. And, I got to support this family again. I didn't have that. And it took me a long time before I was ready to embrace that responsibility. So as I wrap up over the next few minutes. Transparency is the key. As you're released from prison, and if you're single or divorced or looking to re-engage, I suggest not telling someone over dinner for the first time. They should know ahead of time. I suggest not waiting 1, 2, 3, or 4 dates, which some people do. I've had a number of clients admittedly tell me, Justin, I am not going to let them judge me because I went to prison. I'm going to spend, if they want to go out with me again, great. But if it doesn't come up, I'm not telling them on the first, second, third, or fourth date that I went to prison. It's going to come out naturally at the right time, but I'm not going to be shut down because of something that the government says I did that I was forced to take a plea deal to. I'm not going to let them judge me and shut me down because of it. So it's all about choices in life. That's okay. I respect them for making that choice. I just remind them to respect the person with whom they're potentially spending time with. Put themselves in their shoes of how they would feel if on a third, fourth, fifth, or sixth date you heard that I served 3 years in prison for mail fraud or wire fraud or insider trading. That would be off-putting. That would be strange. And I would argue you have a greater chance of derailing the relationship at that stage than had you told them from the beginning. At the least, they would respect you. And I felt respected, even in the relationships that it didn't work out. They all said, you've made me comfortable by telling me, and I'm grateful and I'm thankful for that. So all of this leads to my life now. I'll be 42 in January. I'm been off probation. I've been home from prison since August of 9, off probation since August of 12. And I mentioned earlier the Jewish dating website JDate. And I met a woman on JDate, a wonderful woman who's now my wife. And this is an educated woman who went to Cornell. And I remember when I saw her profile, I was impressed. And I remember thinking, not just that she went to a good school, but that she had a successful career. And I tend to think catastrophically at times. I remember thinking, this is the type of woman where if God forbid something happened to me, she could sustain herself and a family. I like that she was hardworking. And in fact, the first time we spoke, she was in Europe on a vacation by herself. I mean, who goes to Europe by themselves? I really loved that. So when we spoke, I was closer to feeling that I could sustain this, and I was ready to settle down. I was 37, 35, 36. And of course, she said to me on that first call, what do you do? Now, sometimes I mentioned I was too dismissive, and there were times I got tired of telling the story, in part because of my career. But even again, sometimes you're going to get tired of telling everyone you went to jail. So I was slightly dismissive. I said, look, I'm on my way to lecture right now at Pepperdine Law School. I have a career that involves white-collar crime, and I consult white-collar individuals. I'm on my way. I'm going to text you a link to my website. Just check it out. She's like, well, what do you do? I said, well, just check on my website. I was a little dismissive. I sent her the link. I didn't hear back for like 10 days. And I was like, all right, maybe that could have furthered some of my clients' approach. They say, see, had you not told her that through text, she never really got a chance to know you. You should have met her and you could have disclosed it. And there's some truth to that, I suppose, but I always felt better telling them. And about 10 days later, Sandra texted me and said, I've spent time reviewing your work and I appreciate you telling me the truth and what you've been through, and I'd love to get together. And that was satisfying for me because it reaffirmed that my work began to pay off, that an educated woman who could have her choice would be willing to date someone who had served time for facilitating a Ponzi scheme. I mean, no, regardless of how hard I work, nothing disputes the fact that as a young man I facilitated a fraud that hurt people, that till this day people will judge me as a convicted criminal, as a thief, as scum, irrespective of what I do. And that's a consequence of cheating, regardless of what I do or the record I try to create. So she was willing to see me for more than that. And in time we dated, we began dating, and we began to build our life together. And I knew quickly, in fact, on my second date, I told my business partner, Michael Santos, I said, this will be the woman that I marry. And I did. And that was September 22nd, 2013. And we honeymooned in Italy for a few weeks, and my career was continuing to build. I was beginning to speak a little bit less, continuing to work with more and more defendants on their way to prison, discussing all of these issues. And it takes a very strong woman to endure what I do because I'm constantly talking about prison. It's tough at 5 o'clock to shut down some days when I get a call from a defendant that says I have a gun to my head and I'm going to kill myself because I've just been indicted and I've lost my job and my family. It's tough to shut it down and say, honey, what's for dinner? It's hard. And she sees that and she understands that. And together we now have a family. We have a young daughter, Alyssa, who's a little bit more than 2. And I feel that all of the work that I put in has paid off. and it was worth it. Those long days and even the struggle. So as I wrap up what is not uncommon for me, a very long video, I will say I began to prepare for dating after prison in prison. I wrote love letters, I wrote blogs, to begin to prepare for the reality that someday I would be across the table having a glass of wine with a nice woman telling her that I got out of prison. I was prepared for it because I spent time honing my story, being honest and open. So for those of you who are home from prison and who want to date, for those of you who have yet to go to prison, who are single or are divorced, you have to work on your story. You have to own it. The reason my company is White Collar Advice and not prison life or prison whatever, prison advice, so much of the work that I do doesn't involve federal prison. Of course, a lot of it does. I mean, just like a pro golfer practices a 2-foot putt, that's like the bread and butter of what I do, so to speak, thriving through prison. But so much of what I do involves life before and what frankly can be the hardest part, life after federal prison. I hope you found this video on dating after federal prison helpful. I know that my client who embraced his story and told those with whom he dated prior to was immensely grateful for it. He is now in a long-term relationship. This has been going on for many, many months. He's now in a relationship, and I'm proud to call him a friend. And I'm very grateful that while in the prison library, he came across this Esquire magazine where I was quoted about transparency and dating after prison, and he took my advice. And I hope those of you watching will also take my advice because it will make your experience a little easier and a little better, and you'll be more prepared to endure the myriad consequences that follow this tough process. Any questions? jp@whitecollaradvice.com. I wish you all well, and thank you for allowing me to come into your life for a little bit. I appreciate it very much. Bye-bye.